The crystal glass shattered against the marble floor, wine spreading like blood across the pristine white surface. Caspian Thornfield stood frozen in his kitchen doorway, watching the crimson stain seep into the grout lines he'd memorized over 5 years of solitude. "Mr. Thornfield?" The woman's voice cut through his trance. "I'm here about the position." He turned slowly, taking in the stranger who'd somehow entered his locked mansion. She stood near the service entrance, clutching a crumpled newspaper clipping. Auburn hair pulled back severely, pale skin that suggested she rarely saw sunlight, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Young. Too young to be here. The position was filled yesterday. The lie rolled off his tongue easily. He'd been telling it for 3 weeks, turning away every applicant who'd responded to his carefully worded advertisement. No, it wasn't. She stepped forward, glass crunching under her worn boots. "You've been running the same ad for a month. Cook wanted. Live in. No references required. Discreet individuals only." Caspian's jaw tightened. He'd underestimated this one. Most people fled when they saw the iron gates, the overgrown gardens, the windows that never showed light after sunset. This woman had somehow breached his security system and walked into his private domain without invitation. "How did you get in?" "The service door." It was unlocked. She held up a small leather toolkit. "Mostly unlocked. A burglar. Perfect." 5 years of isolation. And now criminals were breaking into his home. He reached for his phone, but she raised her hand. "I'm not here to steal anything. I need work, and you need someone who won't ask questions." Her gaze swept the kitchen, taking in the tower of takeout containers, the coffee-stained counters, the sink full of dishes he hadn't touched in days. "When did you last eat a real meal?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Eleanor used to ask the same thing, standing in this exact spot, hands on her hips as she surveyed his bachelor disasters. Before the accident, before everything turned to ash. "Get out." His voice came out rougher than intended. The woman didn't move. Instead, she walked to his stove, turned on the gas burner, and began examining his abandoned cookware. "You have decent equipment. Expensive. And used." She picked up a cast-iron skillet, testing its weight. Someone who cared about cooking lived here once. Caspian's hands clenched into fists. This stranger was touching Eleanor's things, standing where Eleanor had stood, speaking as if she knew anything about his life. About his loss. "I said get out." "My name is Evangeline Ravencroft." She opened his refrigerator, frowning at the nearly empty shelves. "I've been cooking since I was 12. Institutional kitchens mostly, but I can adapt. I don't drink, I don't steal, and I don't gossip. Your secrets are safe with me because I don't care about them." The brutal honesty in her voice made him pause. Most people who approached him wanted something beyond employment. They'd heard the stories about the reclusive shipping magnate, the tragic widower, the man who'd once commanded boardrooms but now hid from the world. They came fishing for tragedy, for gossip, for a glimpse of his weakness. This woman looked at him like he was simply another job to endure. "I don't need a cook." "Yes, you do." She gestured at the takeout containers. "You're killing yourself slowly. Probably haven't had a vegetable in months. Your skin is gray, your hands shake when you think I'm not looking, and you've lost at least 30 pounds since the photo in your hallway was taken." Heat flashed through him. The photo she referenced showed him with Eleanor at their wedding, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke. He'd forgotten it was still there, forgotten that visitors might see it and make assumptions. "The job pays $1,500 a week, cash. Room and board included. You cook, you clean the kitchen, you stay out of my way. No personal conversations, no attempts at friendship, no curiosity about my business or my past. Can you handle that?" Evangeline nodded once. "When do I start?" "Now." He pulled a key from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "Your room is on the 3rd floor, East Wing. Stay away from the West Wing entirely. I eat at 7, noon, and 6. Leave the food on the counter and disappear. Break anything valuable, and you're gone. Invite anyone here without permission, and you're gone. Ask questions about my wife, and you're gone immediately." She pocketed the key without examining it. "What about groceries?" "There's a market account. Order what you need." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Miss Ravencroft? How did you really get past my security system?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "I used to live in a place with much better locks than yours, Mr. Thornfield, and much worse consequences for getting caught." Evangeline's room smelled like disinfectant and abandonment. The bed frame was solid oak, the mattress still wrapped in plastic. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through windows that overlooked the estate's dead gardens. She'd lived in worse places. The Riverside Home for Children had taught her to assess living situations quickly. This room was clean, private, and came with a lock that actually worked. After 18 years of shared dormitories and supervision, the silence felt like luxury. She unpacked her single duffel bag in under 5 minutes. 3 changes of clothes, basic toiletries, her knife roll, and a battered cookbook that had belonged to Mrs. Chun, the only kitchen supervisor who'd bothered teaching her anything beyond institutional slop. The woman had died when Evangeline was 16, leaving behind recipes written in broken English and the knowledge that food could be something more than mere survival. At 6:30, she descended to the kitchen and began her first meal for Caspian Thornfield. The refrigerator contained expired milk, takeout containers, and a collection of energy drinks that explained his jittery demeanor. The pantry was better stocked, though everything carried a layer of dust that suggested years of neglect. She prepared something simple: roasted chicken with rosemary, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans that had seen better days but were still salvageable. The kind of meal that filled empty spaces without demanding attention. Comfort food for someone who'd forgotten what comfort felt like. At exactly 7 o'clock, footsteps echoed in the hallway. She plated the food, set it on the granite counter, and retreated to the pantry as instructed. Through the crack in the door, she watched him enter. Caspian Thornfield moved like a man carrying invisible weight. His shoulders curved inward, his steps measured and deliberate. Dark hair streaked with premature silver, lines etched around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his controlled devastation. He stood before the plate for a long moment, studying her work. Then he picked up the fork and took a bite. The change was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders relaxed fractionally. He took another bite, then another, eating with the mechanical precision of someone who'd forgotten that meals could be enjoyed rather than endured. When he finished, he left the empty plate on the counter and disappeared back into the mansion's shadows. The next morning brought groceries delivered by a service that clearly knew better than to linger. Quality ingredients, expensive cuts of meat, produce that hadn't been sitting in warehouses for weeks. Someone had established accounts that prioritized freshness over cost. She spent the morning exploring the kitchen's capabilities. Professional-grade appliances, knife sets that cost more than most people's monthly rent, cookware that had been chosen by someone who understood the craft. Eleanor Thornfield, she assumed. The dead wife, who couldn't be mentioned. At noon, she prepared a simple lunch: grilled salmon with lemon, wild rice, and asparagus. Again, she retreated to watch him eat. Again, that moment of recognition when he tasted something made with care instead of manufactured for profit. By the third day, she'd established a routine. Cook, serve, disappear. Clean the kitchen while he ate, maintain the equipment, order supplies. It was peaceful work, satisfying in ways that institutional cooking had never been. She was feeding one person instead of hundreds, creating meals instead of reheating pre-made portions. The silence suited her. She'd grown up in a place where conversation was monitored, where every word could be used as evidence of misbehavior or instability. Here, she could work without commentary, without someone questioning her methods or motivations. On Friday afternoon, while preparing dinner, she heard voices in the hallway. Male voices, one belonging to Caspian, the other unfamiliar. She continued working, but kept her ears open. "You can't keep living like this, Caspian. It's been 5 years. My lifestyle isn't your concern, Dorian. The board is asking questions. You've missed 3 meetings this month. Shareholders are getting nervous when the CEO becomes a ghost story." Evangeline paused in her chopping. CEO? She'd assumed he was wealthy, but hadn't considered he might be actively running a company while hiding in his mansion. The company runs itself. You handle the day-to-day operations, I handle the big picture. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed. You used to be involved, engaged. Now you sign papers and disappear. This isn't what Eleanor would have wanted. The kitchen fell silent. Even from the next room, Evangeline could feel the tension crystallizing. "Don't." Caspian's voice carried a warning that made her freeze. Don't pretend to know what she would have wanted. I knew her too, remember? She was my friend before she was your wife. She'd hate seeing you like this. Footsteps approached the kitchen. Evangeline quickly resumed her prep work, head down, hands busy with vegetables. Two men entered. Caspian, looking like he'd swallowed glass, and a stranger who radiated the kind of confidence that came from expensive suits and inherited privilege. The newcomer was younger than Caspian, maybe mid-30s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smile that belonged in political campaigns. He stopped when he saw her, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused attention. I didn't know you'd hired help. This is Miss Ravencroft. She prepares meals. Caspian's tone suggested the conversation should end there. Dorian extended his hand. Dorian Whitmore. I'm Caspian's attorney and business partner. She wiped her hands on her apron before shaking his hand briefly. His grip lingered longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that made her skin crawl. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Ravencroft. I hope you're finding the position satisfactory. It's adequate. His smile widened. I'm sure it is. Caspian's always been generous with his domestic arrangements. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. There was an implication there, a suggestion that her role might encompass more than cooking. Heat flashed through her, the old institutional anger that had gotten her into trouble more times than she could count. I cook food. Nothing else. Of course. His smile never wavered. Though I imagine it gets lonely, working in such a big house with so little companionship. Caspian stepped between them. Dorian has work to do elsewhere. Actually, I was hoping to stay for dinner. It's been too long since I've enjoyed a home-cooked meal. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Evangeline could feel the undercurrents she didn't understand, the history between these men that went deeper than business partnerships. Whatever game Dorian was playing, Caspian didn't want him to win. Miss Ravencroft only prepares enough for one. I'm sure she wouldn't mind making a little extra. Would you, Miss Ravencroft? Both men looked at her, waiting. In the orphanage, she'd learned to navigate power struggles between adults who used children as chess pieces in their personal wars. This felt similar. Two men establishing territory, using her presence as a weapon against each other. I can prepare additional portions if required. Dorian's smile turned triumphant. Excellent. I'll be back at 7. After he left, Caspian remained in the kitchen, staring at the spot where his friend had stood. His hand moved unconsciously to his left wrist, fingers tracing something beneath his sleeve. The gesture was automatic, unconscious, and told her more about his state of mind than any words could have. He makes you nervous. Caspian's head snapped up. I told you no personal conversations. That wasn't personal. That was observation. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he was seeing her clearly for the first time since she'd arrived. Not as an employee or an intrusion, but as a person capable of reading situations and drawing conclusions. Prepare dinner for 2. Nothing fancy. What should I avoid? Avoid. Everyone has foods they hate. Things that bring back bad memories. What should I not cook? His hand moved to his wrist again, that unconscious gesture that betrayed his carefully controlled exterior. Anything Eleanor used to make. Dorian arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's rent and an attitude that suggested he owned everything he touched. Evangeline served dinner in the formal dining room, a cavernous space with crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to disapprove of everything. She retreated to the kitchen but kept the door cracked, instincts honed by years of avoiding trouble telling her to stay alert. Their conversation drifted through the walls, voices rising and falling with the tension that had been building since the afternoon. The Henderson contract needs your signature by Monday. Email it. You haven't been to the office in 2 months. People are starting to talk. Let them talk. The sound of silverware against china punctuated their exchange. Dorian was eating with appreciation, making small sounds of approval that felt calculated rather than genuine. Everything about him seemed designed to provoke a reaction. This is exceptional. Your cook has real talent. She does her job. She's quite attractive too. Young. I imagine she appreciates the stability of live-in employment. Silence stretched between them. Evangeline found herself holding her breath, waiting for Caspian's response. Careful, Dorian. I'm just making conversation. Though I have to wonder what Eleanor would think about you hiring such a young, pretty woman to live in your house. The crash of a chair being pushed back echoed through the walls. Evangeline moved closer to the door, tension coiling in her stomach. Get out. I'm just saying that appearances matter. The board, the shareholders, they notice these things. A grieving widower is sympathetic. A man who's moved on with inappropriate help is scandalous. There's nothing inappropriate happening. Of course not. But perception is reality in our world. Maybe I should have a conversation with Miss Ravencroft. Make sure she understands the delicate nature of her position here. Evangeline had heard enough. She pushed through the kitchen door and entered the dining room, carrying a tray of dessert she hadn't been planning to serve. Gentlemen, she set the tray down with deliberate precision. I couldn't help overhearing your concern about appearances, Mr. Whitmore. Dorian's eyebrows rose. Oh, I want to assure you that my employment here is strictly professional. I cook, I clean the kitchen, I stay out of Mr. Thornfield's personal business. Nothing more, nothing less. How refreshing. Direct communication is so rare these days. I find it prevents misunderstandings. She looked directly at him, letting him see the steel beneath her calm exterior. I'm not interested in anything beyond my salary and my room. I'm not looking for gossip, romance, or trouble. I just want to do my job without interference. Dorian's smile sharpened. And what if someone offered you better terms elsewhere? I'd decline. I don't like change. Everyone has a price, Miss Ravencroft. Mine isn't for sale. The silence that followed felt charged with electricity. Caspian was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, while Dorian looked like a cat who'd discovered the canary could fight back. Well, Dorian pushed back from the table. This has been illuminating. Caspian, we'll finish our business discussion later. After he left, Evangeline began clearing the dishes. Caspian remained seated, staring at the wine Dorian had brought but barely touched. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Defend yourself. Defend this arrangement. She stacked plates with practiced efficiency. I defended my job. There's a difference. Is there? The question hung between them, loaded with implications she wasn't ready to examine. She'd spent years learning to recognize danger, and whatever was building in this house felt more volatile than anything she'd encountered in the orphanage. Mr. Thornfield, can I ask you something? His hand moved to his wrist again, that unconscious gesture she was beginning to recognize as a tell. What? Do you trust him? Dorian? He's been my business partner for 8 years. My friend since college. That's not what I asked. Caspian stood slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the dead gardens. Trust is a luxury I can't afford anymore. Then why do you let him come here? Because some obligations transcend personal comfort. She wanted to ask what that meant, but his posture suggested the conversation was over. Instead, she finished clearing the table and returned to the kitchen, leaving him alone with his shadows and his wine. Later that night, while organizing the pantry, she discovered a door she hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a rack of hanging pots, barely visible in the dim light. When she tried the handle, it opened onto a narrow staircase leading up into darkness. Curiosity won over caution. She climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step for creaks. The staircase ended at another door, this one slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see into what appeared to be a study or office. The room was filled with photographs, not displayed like a gallery, but scattered across every surface like someone had been sorting through memories and abandoned the task halfway through. Photos of Caspian and a woman with dark hair and laughing eyes. Wedding photos, vacation shots, candid moments that captured a happiness so complete it was almost painful to witness. Eleanor. This was Eleanor's face, Eleanor's smile, Eleanor's life frozen in silver frames and glossy prints. And in every image, Caspian looked like a different person. Younger, lighter, unburdened by the weight that now seemed to define him. She was beautiful. Evangeline spun around, heart hammering. Caspian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry. I was organizing the pantry and found the stairs. I didn't mean to intrude. But you did anyway. Heat flooded her cheeks. Yes. He stepped into the room, moving among the scattered photographs like a man walking through a minefield. This was our study. Shared workspace. She was an architect, designed buildings that made people feel hopeful. Evangeline remained frozen by the door, afraid to move and disturb whatever fragile moment was unfolding. After the accident, I couldn't stand being in here, but I couldn't bear to pack it away either. So it sits exactly as she left it. Her coffee cup is still on the desk, half-finished blueprint still in the printer. How did she die? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He went very still, his hand moving to his wrist with mechanical precision. Car accident. 5 years ago. She was driving home from a dinner with friends. Black ice, guardrail, 30-foot drop into the river. His voice was flat, rehearsed, like he'd told the story so many times it had lost all meaning. They said she died on impact, that she didn't suffer. But you don't believe that. He looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? The way you touch your wrist when you're lying. You've been doing it since I arrived. For a moment, she thought he might explode. His jaw tightened, his breathing became shallow, and she prepared to run. Instead, he laughed. A bitter, broken sound that held no humor whatsoever. You're observant. I had to be. Growing up where I did, reading people meant survival. And what do you read when you look at me? The question was dangerous territory, but something in his voice suggested he genuinely wanted an answer. Guilt, anger, loneliness, and underneath it all, fear that if you stop punishing yourself, it means you didn't love her enough. The silence stretched between them, heavy with truth neither of them was prepared to handle. Then Caspian moved toward her, his steps deliberate and predatory. You're right about one thing. I am afraid. He stopped close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. But not about forgetting her. I'm afraid of what happens when I start remembering how to live again. The air between them crackled with electricity. Evangeline found herself trapped between the door and his presence, caught in the gravity of his grief and the dangerous heat building beneath his carefully controlled surface. Mr. Thornfield, Caspian. My name is Caspian. This isn't appropriate. Nothing about this situation is appropriate. You broke into my house. I hired you anyway. You're half my age. You call me on my lies, and you make me want to eat again. His hand rose, almost touching her face before he caught himself. But you're right. It's not appropriate. He stepped back, the spell broken. You should go to your room, Miss Ravencroft. And next time you find a hidden door, perhaps you should leave it closed. She fled up the stairs to her room, heart pounding and skin still burning from his almost touch. Behind her locked door, she tried to process what had just happened. The man who barely spoke during meals had just revealed more about himself in 10 minutes than most people shared in months. And despite every instinct telling her to run, despite the obvious complications and the dangerous territory they were entering, she found herself hoping he would need her to stay. The next morning brought rain that turned the dead gardens into a muddy wasteland. Evangeline stood at the kitchen window, watching water pool in the empty fountain while her coffee grew cold. She'd barely slept, replaying the scene in Eleanor's study until every word was burned into her memory. Caspian appeared at 7:30, later than usual, looking like he'd slept even less than she had. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and those gold-flecked eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. Good morning. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. He nodded, settling at the counter where she'd placed his breakfast. Eggs Benedict with perfectly poached eggs, hollandaise sauce that had taken 3 attempts to achieve the right consistency. She'd thrown herself into the cooking, needing the familiar rhythm of preparation to quiet her racing thoughts. This is exceptional. He took another bite, genuine appreciation in his voice. Where did you learn to cook like this? The question surprised her. Personal conversation had been forbidden since her first day, but the events of last night seemed to have shifted the rules between them. Mrs. Chun. She ran the kitchen at Riverside Home for Children. Most of the staff treated us like cattle to be fed efficiently, but she actually cared about the food. Evangeline refilled his coffee cup, noting how his fingers lingered near hers when he accepted it. She taught me that cooking is about more than nutrition. It's about dignity, comfort, love. You grew up in an orphanage. Until I was 18. Then I aged out and had to figure out the rest on my own. Caspian set down his fork, studying her with new intensity. What happened to your parents? The old defensive walls rose automatically. I never knew them. Sometimes people abandon babies, sometimes they die, sometimes they're just not capable of parenting. The reasons don't matter when you're the one left behind. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me to be self-sufficient. Is that why you're not afraid of me? The question caught her off guard. Should I be afraid of you? Most people are. The grieving widower who hides from the world. who fires housekeepers for asking too many questions. They think I might be dangerous. Are you? He considered this seriously. I don't know anymore. I used to be predictable, stable, safe. Now I feel like I'm held together with spite and stubbornness. Some days I'm not sure what I'm capable of. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. She'd spent years around broken people, kids who'd been damaged by abandonment and abuse, adults who'd given up on finding anything good in the world. But Caspian's brokenness felt different. He'd had something beautiful and lost it, rather than never having it at all. Tell me about the night she died. His hand moved to his wrist, that unconscious gesture she now recognized as his tell. We'd had a fight. Nothing serious, just one of those married couple disagreements that feel important at the time. She wanted to go to dinner with her college friends. I wanted to stay home and work on a presentation. She said I was becoming a hermit. I said she was avoiding responsibility. He paused, staring into his coffee like it held answers. She left angry, told me to enjoy my precious presentation because it was apparently more important than spending time with her. 3 hours later, the police were at my door. What was the fight really about? What makes you think it was about more than dinner plans? Because people don't carry 5 years of guilt over missing one social event. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She wanted children. We'd been trying for 2 years with no success. The doctors said there was nothing wrong with either of us. It just wasn't happening. She suggested we take a break from trying, maybe consider other options. I thought she meant adoption. She meant separation. The pieces clicked into place. She was leaving you. She was thinking about it. Said she needed space to figure out what she really wanted. The dinner with friends was supposed to be research, talking to other women about their choices, their regrets. His laugh was bitter. I was so focused on the business, on providing for our future family, that I missed the fact my wife was drowning in disappointment. So you blame yourself for her leaving that night. I blame myself for not being the husband she needed, for letting work consume me, for not seeing how much the fertility issues were affecting her, for not fighting harder to keep her home. He pushed back from the counter. She died thinking I didn't love her enough to put her first. Did you? The question hung between them like a blade. Caspian's face went through a series of expressions, anger and pain, and something that might have been relief at finally being asked the question that haunted him. I don't know. I thought I did, but my actions suggested otherwise. If I'd really loved her the way she deserved, she never would have considered leaving. Or maybe she was dealing with her own pain and needed to blame someone for circumstances beyond anyone's control. He looked at her sharply. Don't make excuses for me. I'm not. I'm suggesting that maybe you're both right and both wrong. Maybe she needed space to grieve the family you couldn't have, and maybe you needed to learn how to support her through that grief. Maybe the accident happened before either of you could figure out how to heal together. You speak like someone who's familiar with loss. Everyone at Riverside was familiar with loss. We all lost something before we got there, and we kept losing things while we were there. People left, aged out, got adopted, got moved to other facilities. You learn that life doesn't pause for grief. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, interrupting their conversation. They both turned as Cordelia Blackthorne swept into the kitchen like a force of nature. Tall, elegant, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of bone structure that suggested generations of good breeding, she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Caspian, darling. She kissed his cheek before he could protest. I knocked, but no one answered. I hope you don't mind me letting myself in. Evangeline recognized her from some of the photographs upstairs. Eleanor's friend, the one who appeared in several vacation shots and formal event pictures. She looked older now, more brittle, but still striking. Cordelia, this is unexpected. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on you. It's been months since we've talked. Her gaze shifted to Evangeline, cataloging everything from her practical clothing to her guarded expression. And you must be the new cook I've heard about. Evangeline Ravencroft. Cordelia Blackthorne. I was Eleanor's dearest friend. She said it like a title, something that granted her special privileges and access. How lovely that Caspian finally found someone to take care of him properly. The words were innocent enough, but something in her tone suggested hidden meanings. Evangeline had learned to read subtext in institutional settings where direct confrontation was punished but passive aggression flourished. I prepare meals. Nothing more. Of course, dear. Though I must say, you're much younger than I expected. And prettier. Cordelia turned back to Caspian. Eleanor always worried about you hiring attractive help. She said men could be so easily distracted by a pretty face and forget their responsibilities. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caspian's jaw tightened, and Evangeline felt heat flood her cheeks. Eleanor never said anything of the kind. Oh, but she did. Perhaps not in those exact words, but the concern was there. She worried about your tendency to work too much, to lose yourself in business and forget about the people who loved you. Cordelia's smile was sharp as glass. I suppose it's natural that you'd eventually seek comfort elsewhere. Cordelia, that's enough. I'm simply making conversation. Though I do think Eleanor would be surprised by how quickly you've moved on. 5 years feels like a long time when you're the one living it, but from the outside, it seems rather sudden. Evangeline had heard enough. She began clearing the breakfast dishes with deliberate efficiency, letting the clatter of china express her opinion of the conversation. Miss Ravencroft, perhaps you could give us some privacy? Cordelia's tone was polite but firm. She can stay. Caspian's voice brooked no argument. This is her workplace. How modern of you. Eleanor always believed in maintaining proper boundaries between family and staff. Eleanor isn't here to maintain anything. The words hung in the air like a slap. Cordelia's composed expression cracked slightly, revealing something ugly underneath. No, she isn't. And whose fault is that? Silence filled the kitchen. Evangeline froze in her cleaning, sensing she'd stumbled into the middle of something much larger and more dangerous than a social call. What are you really doing here, Cordelia? I think you know. It's been 5 years, Caspian. Time for the truth to come out. The truth about what? About what really happened that night. About why Eleanor was so upset when she left. About what you're not telling anyone, including yourself. Caspian went very still, his hand moving to his wrist with mechanical precision. Eleanor died in a car accident. That's the truth. Eleanor died because she was running away from you, and from something she discovered that changed everything. The silence stretched until Evangeline could hear her own heartbeat. Caspian's face had gone ashen, while Cordelia watched him with the predatory focus of a cat cornering a mouse. What are you talking about? His voice was barely controlled. Eleanor came to see me that afternoon. Before the dinner, before your fight, before everything went wrong. Cordelia moved closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She was devastated. Caspian said she'd discovered something that changed how she saw your entire marriage. You're lying. Am I? She showed me documents from your office. Financial records. Correspondence. Cordelia's smile was cruel. Things that proved you weren't the man she thought she'd married. Evangeline watched Caspian's hand move to his wrist, the gesture now desperate rather than unconscious. Whatever Cordelia was suggesting, it was hitting its mark. Eleanor never mentioned seeing you that day. Because you never gave her the chance. She died before she could confront you properly. But she told me everything, Caspian. About the money, about the business deals, about what you were really doing while she thought you were working late. Stop. The word came out like a gunshot. The truth hurts, doesn't it? All these years, you've been playing the grieving widower, the devoted husband destroyed by loss. But you know what really happened. You know why she wanted to leave. Evangeline had heard enough. Whatever game Cordelia was playing, it was designed to destroy rather than illuminate. She stepped forward, placing herself between the two combatants. Mrs. Blackthorne, perhaps this conversation would be better held in private. How thoughtful. But I think everyone should hear this, don't you? Especially someone who's considering getting involved with Caspian. Cordelia's gaze was poisonous. You should know what kind of man you're working for. I know exactly what kind of man I'm working for. Do you? Has he told you about his business practices? About the corners he cuts, the people he ruins? Has he mentioned why Eleanor was so upset that last day? Has he told you that you're a vindictive woman who's using a dead friend's memory to settle old scores? The words slipped out before Evangeline could stop them. Cordelia's composure cracked completely, revealing the rage beneath her polished exterior. How dare you speak to me like that? You're nothing but hired help. And you're nothing but a bitter woman who can't stand that your friend moved on and found happiness without you. Evangeline, don't. Caspian's voice carried a warning, but she was past caring about consequences. No, she needs to hear this. You come into this house, into his kitchen, and attack him with vague accusations and twisted implications. If you have something real to say, say it. Otherwise, get out. Cordelia's face flushed red. You little nobody. You have no idea what you're defending. I'm defending basic human decency, something you seem to have misplaced. Ladies, enough. Caspian stepped between them, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Cordelia, you've said your piece. Evangeline, go upstairs. But now, Evangeline looked between them, recognizing the finality in his tone. Whatever was about to happen, he wanted to face it alone. She gathered her courage and looked directly at Cordelia. Whatever you think you know about that night, whatever you think gives you the right to torture him, remember that Eleanor is gone. You're attacking a man who can't defend himself against accusations from the dead. That makes you a coward. She left before anyone could respond, climbing the stairs to her room with her heart hammering. From below, she could hear raised voices but couldn't make out the words. The argument raged for 20 minutes before a door slammed and an engine roared to life in the driveway. She waited another hour before venturing downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but she could hear movement in the study above. Following the hidden staircase, she found Caspian standing among Eleanor's scattered photographs, holding a manila folder that hadn't been there the night before. She left this. His voice was hollow. Said Eleanor gave it to her for safekeeping. What is it? Financial records. Documentation of business deals from 5 years ago. He opened the folder, revealing bank statements, correspondence, contracts. Eleanor thought I was embezzling money from the company. Evangeline moved closer, studying the papers. Were you? No, but it looks like I was. He pointed to a series of transactions. Money moving between accounts, payments to shell companies, transfers that bypassed normal oversight. Someone was stealing from Thornfield Shipping, and they made it look like I was responsible. Who had access to these accounts? The executive team. Me, Dorian, the CFO, a few senior managers. His hand moved to his wrist again. Eleanor found these in my office safe. She thought I was hiding criminal activity from her. But you weren't. No, but by the time I could have explained, she was dead. He sank into Eleanor's desk chair, surrounded by the detritus of their life together. She died thinking I was a thief and a liar. Evangeline studied the documents more carefully. The transactions were sophisticated, carefully designed to create a trail that led back to Caspian while hiding the real perpetrator. Someone with intimate knowledge of the company's financial systems had orchestrated this. These dates, she said, pointing to a series of transfers. They're all from times when you were traveling for business. How could you know that? Because someone meticulous enough to plan this kind of frame job would make sure you had alibis that proved you weren't physically present to authorize these transactions. She flipped through more pages. But they were sloppy about one thing. The shell companies all have similar naming patterns. Whoever set this up has limited imagination. Caspian looked up sharply. You think you know who did this? I think someone close to you has been stealing money for years and needed a scapegoat. When Eleanor started asking questions, they planted evidence to make you look guilty. She met his eyes. Who else knew about your safe combination? Only Dorian. And Eleanor, of course. And who benefits if you're discredited or removed from the company? Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by denial. No, Dorian's my oldest friend. We built this company together. Sometimes the people closest to us are the most dangerous. They know our weaknesses, our blind spots, our trust. Evangeline sat on the edge of Eleanor's desk. You said Eleanor was upset that day? Maybe she confronted someone about these documents before she came to you. You think she confronted Dorian. I think she discovered something that got her killed. The words hung between them like an accusation. Caspian stared at the financial records, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with horrible clarity. The dinner that night. Eleanor was supposed to meet her college friends, but Cordelia said she came to see her instead. What if she did both? What if she went to dinner to discuss the documents with someone she trusted? Someone who convinced her that you were guilty. Someone who needed to silence her before she dug deeper. Caspian's voice was getting stronger, anger replacing despair. Dorian knew about the dinner plans. He could have arranged to be there, could have offered to drive her home, or followed her when she left. They stared at each other, the implications building between them like a storm. If they were right, then Eleanor's death wasn't an accident, and the man responsible had been coming to this house for 5 years, playing the concerned friend while watching Caspian destroy himself with guilt. We need proof. We need to be careful. Evangeline gathered the scattered documents. If Dorian killed once to protect his secret, he won't hesitate to kill again. Then what do you suggest? She looked around the room, taking in the photographs of Eleanor's happy life, the coffee cups still sitting on the desk, the blueprint still waiting in the printer. This woman had died thinking her husband was a criminal, never knowing she'd stumbled onto something much worse. We prove your innocence, and then we make him pay for what he took from both of you. In the drawer of Eleanor's desk, Evangeline discovered something that made her breath catch. A small wooden box containing dried herbs and spices, each carefully labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. Rosemary from the garden, thyme from the farmer's market, sage that smelled like summer mornings. But at the bottom of the box was something that didn't belong. A packet of dried leaves labeled in different handwriting. For headaches, use sparingly. She held up the packet, studying the unfamiliar script. Did Eleanor suffer from headaches? No, she was remarkably healthy. Caspian frowned. Why? Because someone gave her medicine for a condition she didn't have, and they were careful to warn about using too much. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You think she was poisoned? I think someone made sure she was impaired before she got behind the wheel that night. Just enough to cause an accident, not enough to show up in a standard autopsy. They stared at the innocent-looking packet, evidence of a crime that had gone undetected for 5 years. In the distance, they heard the front door open and close. Caspian, are you home? Dorian's voice echoed through the house, cheerful and concerned. Evangeline quickly pocketed the herb packet while Caspian gathered the financial documents. We can't let him know we suspect anything. Can you act normal around him? I've been acting normal around broken people my entire life. She touched his hand briefly. Can you? Before he could answer, footsteps approached the study. They barely had time to shove the documents into Eleanor's desk drawer before Dorian appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation as he took in their proximity. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Just showing Miss Ravencroft some of Eleanor's architectural work. Caspian's voice was steady, betraying nothing of the revelation they'd just shared. She expressed interest in the design elements of the house. Dorian's smile didn't reach his eyes. How thoughtful. Eleanor would be pleased to know someone appreciates her talent. He moved into the room, his presence immediately making the space feel smaller and more dangerous. Though I'm surprised you're comfortable being in here, Caspian. You usually avoid this room. Things change. Indeed they do. Dorian's gaze shifted between them, calculating. I actually came by to discuss the Morrison contract, but I can see you're busy with other matters. Evangeline stepped away from the desk, putting distance between herself and the hidden documents. I should return to the kitchen. Dinner won't prepare itself. Actually, Miss Ravencroft, I was hoping to speak with you as well. Dorian's tone was casual, but something in his eyes made her skin crawl. About your conversation with Cordelia this morning. What about it? She was quite upset when she left. Said you were rather hostile toward a grieving friend. I was protecting my employer from harassment. How admirable. Though I wonder if your protective instincts might be clouding your judgment about certain situations. Caspian moved closer to Evangeline, a subtle shift that didn't go unnoticed by Dorian. What are you suggesting? Simply that Miss Ravencroft might benefit from understanding the complete picture before making enemies of people who knew Eleanor well. Dorian's smile sharpened. Cordelia has been concerned about your well-being for years, Caspian. We all have. I don't need anyone's concern. Don't you? You've isolated yourself, refused treatment for your obvious depression, hired live-in help half your age. Dorian shrugged. From the outside, it looks like someone struggling with guilt and making questionable decisions. My decisions are none of your business. Actually, they are. As your business partner and the executor of Eleanor's estate, I have a responsibility to ensure you're making sound choices. His gaze fixed on Evangeline, especially choices that might affect the company's reputation. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Evangeline felt the familiar surge of institutional anger, the rage of someone who'd spent years being manipulated by people in positions of power. Are you suggesting my employment here is somehow improper? I'm suggesting that appearances matter. A wealthy widower, an attractive young woman living in his house, rumors already circulating about the nature of your relationship. Dorian spread his hands. It's a delicate situation that requires careful handling. What kind of careful handling? Perhaps a different position would be more appropriate. I know several families who could use a talented cook. Away from here, away from the complications. I'm not interested in other positions. You might want to reconsider. Sometimes staying in a situation becomes uncomfortable for everyone involved. The menace beneath his polite words was unmistakable. Evangeline had heard similar threats from case workers who didn't like her attitude, from potential foster families who wanted compliant children, from anyone who thought they could control her through fear. Mr. Whitmore, let me be clear. I work for Mr. Thornfield, not for you. I don't take orders from you. I don't need your approval, and I certainly don't need your career advice. How independent. Eleanor used to be like that, in the beginning. So sure of herself, so confident in her choices. Dorian's voice carried a false fondness that made Evangeline's skin crawl. Of course, that confidence faded once she learned certain truths about her situation. Caspian went very still. What truths? The same truths I'm trying to spare Miss Ravencroft from discovering. Some revelations are too painful to bear. Stop speaking in riddles. Very well. Eleanor discovered that you'd been lying to her for years. About the business, about your finances, about your true character. She came to me heartbroken, asking for advice about what to do with a husband she could no longer trust. Evangeline watched Caspian's face, saw the moment when understanding and rage collided. His hand moved to his wrist, but this time the gesture was deliberate rather than unconscious. You son of a bitch. I tried to counsel her, tried to suggest that marriage required forgiveness and compromise. But she was too hurt, too angry. She said she needed time to think, time to decide whether she could stay married to a man who'd betrayed her so completely. So you killed her. The words hung in the air like a detonation. Dorian's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, something predatory and cold. That's quite an accusation, Caspian, especially from someone with so much guilt about that night. You planted those financial records. You made her think I was stealing from the company. Did I? Or did I simply help her see what was already there? Evangeline felt the conversation spiraling toward violence. Both men were coiled tight, ready to explode, and she was trapped between them with nowhere to run. We have proof, she said quietly. Dorian turned toward her, his mask of civility finally slipping. What kind of proof? The kind that explains how Eleanor really died. And why? For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Dorian reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at Evangeline's chest. I really wish you hadn't said that. Caspian lunged forward, but Dorian swung the weapon toward him. Don't. I'd hate to have to explain why you were shot while attacking an old friend. You won't get away with this. I've been getting away with it for 5 years. 2 more bodies won't be difficult to explain, especially when the evidence shows a mentally unstable widower who snapped and killed his young employee before taking his own life. Evangeline's mind raced, looking for escape routes, weapons, anything that might shift the balance. But they were trapped in Eleanor's study, surrounded by memories and with a killer holding them at gunpoint. The herb packet. We found it in Eleanor's desk. Dorian's smile was genuinely pleased. Clever girl. Yes, I gave her something for the headache she'd been complaining about. Just a little something to make her drowsy, slow her reflexes. I never intended for her to die, you understand. I just needed her to have an accident serious enough to require hospitalization, maybe some memory loss. But she died anyway. Unfortunately, yes. Black ice, bad timing, poor luck. Though I must admit, her death solved several problems at once. The casual admission sent ice through Evangeline's veins. This man had killed Eleanor as collateral damage in his scheme to frame Caspian, and now he was preparing to kill them both to protect his secret. Why? Caspian's voice was raw with grief and rage. Why destroy everything? Because everything was already mine. The company, the success, the respect. You were just the figurehead, the name on the door. I did the real work, made the real decisions, built the real value. But you got the credit because your family founded the company. So you decided to take it all. I decided to claim what was rightfully mine. With you discredited and Eleanor gone, I would have been the natural choice to take control. Unfortunately, your guilt and self-imposed exile made it unnecessary to push further. Until now. Dorian gestured with the gun. Miss Ravencroft, please move away from the desk. We're going to take a little drive to the bridge where Eleanor died. Very poetic, don't you think? The drive to Blackwater Bridge took 20 minutes through winding Massachusetts back roads. Dorian sat behind the wheel with the casual confidence of someone who'd planned this scenario multiple times. Evangeline was pressed against the passenger door, the gun trained on her, while Caspian sat rigid in the back seat. You know, Eleanor fought harder than I expected, Dorian said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Even drugged, she sensed something was wrong when I offered to follow her home. Smart woman. Too smart for her own good. Shut up. Caspian's voice was deadly quiet. She actually tried to call you from the car. Did you know that? 3 missed calls while you were probably sulking in your study. If you'd answered, she might still be alive. The psychological torture was deliberate, designed to break Caspian's resolve before they reached their destination. Evangeline had seen similar tactics in the orphanage, bullies who understood that emotional wounds cut deeper than physical ones. He's trying to distract you, she said quietly. Don't let him get in your head. Wise advice from someone so young. Tell me, Miss Ravencroft, what's your plan here? Heroic sacrifice? Last-minute escape? Or are you simply hoping someone will rescue you? I'm hoping you'll make a mistake. Such as underestimating what desperate people are willing to do. The bridge appeared ahead, a narrow span of steel and concrete stretching across a gorge where water rushed 40 feet below. The same bridge where Eleanor had died, where her car had broken through the guardrail and plunged into the darkness. Dorian parked near the center of the span and turned off the engine. Traffic was light this time of evening, giving them privacy for whatever he had planned. Out of the car. Slowly, they climbed out into the damp evening air. Below them, the Blackwater River churned with spring runoff, dark and unforgiving. Evangeline could see why Eleanor's accident had been fatal. The drop was steep, the water deep, the current strong enough to carry a body miles downstream. This is where it happened. Dorian gestured toward a section of guardrail that looked newer than the rest. Eleanor's car went through right there. They found her 3 days later, pinned in the wreckage 12 miles downstream. Caspian stared at the spot where his wife had died, his face etched with pain. Did she suffer? Probably. The initial impact would have been survivable, but the drowning. Dorian shrugged. The medical examiner said she lived for several minutes after the car hit the water. You bastard. I'm a practical man who solved a practical problem. Eleanor discovered my financial arrangements and threatened to expose them. I needed her silenced, but permanently removing her seemed excessive. The accident was supposed to be minor, just enough to muddle her memory and discredit her accusations. But you killed her anyway. I made her death possible. Fate did the rest. Dorian checked his watch. Which brings us to the present situation. 2 tragic deaths, a murder-suicide that will shock the community. The unstable widower who finally snapped and killed his young employee before taking his own life at the scene of his wife's accident. Nobody will believe that. They'll believe what the evidence tells them. And I'll be there to provide context, to explain how worried I was about Caspian's mental state, how I tried to intervene before it was too late. Evangeline studied their surroundings, looking for anything that might shift the odds in their favor. The bridge was isolated, but not completely deserted. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights briefly illuminating the scene before disappearing into the night. How exactly do you plan to stage this? She asked. Caspian shoots you first, overcome by jealousy and possessiveness. Then, consumed by guilt and grief, he turns the gun on himself. Very tragic, very believable. Except for one problem, which is, Caspian doesn't own a gun. Dorian smiled. He does now? Purchased 3 weeks ago from a dealer in Boston. Registered properly, completely legal. I've been planning this contingency for some time. The revelation hit Caspian like a physical blow. You've been setting me up for months. Years, actually. Ever since you started showing interest in moving on with your life. I couldn't risk you recovering from Eleanor's death and becoming functional again. A broken Caspian was useful. A healed Caspian might start asking uncomfortable questions. So you arranged for Evangeline to come here. Not arranged exactly, but when I saw her response to your advertisement, I made sure she was the only applicant you'd consider. Young, attractive, mysterious past. Perfect bait for a lonely widower. Evangeline felt sick. Her arrival, her employment, Even their growing connection had been manipulated by this man. She'd thought she was escaping her institutional past, but she'd walked directly into another form of captivity. The only thing I didn't anticipate was how quickly you'd both figure out the truth. Cordelia was supposed to plant doubts, make you suspicious of each other. Instead, you united against a common enemy. "We know about the herbs you gave Eleanor," Caspian said. "The police will find them." "Actually, they won't. I removed that packet from Eleanor's desk while you were having your touching moment of discovery. Really, you should have been more careful about your evidence." Dorian pulled the familiar packet from his pocket, the one Evangeline had seen in Eleanor's herb collection. "This little inconvenience disappears with you." A car approached from the south, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Dorian tensed, raising the gun slightly. "Wave them past. Any attempt to signal for help, and I shoot Miss Ravencroft immediately." The car slowed as it neared them, the driver apparently concerned by the sight of three people standing beside a vehicle on the bridge. Evangeline met Caspian's eyes and saw the same desperate calculation she was making. This might be their only chance. The car stopped, and a middle-aged man rolled down his window. "Everything all right out here?" "Car trouble," Dorian called back. "Just waiting for a tow truck." The Good Samaritan nodded and began to drive away. But Evangeline had grown up in an institution where survival meant taking desperate chances when they presented themselves. She threw herself sideways into Dorian, using her full body weight to knock him off balance. The gun discharged, the bullet whining off into the darkness as they both went down hard on the asphalt. Caspian was moving before they hit the ground, diving for the weapon as Dorian tried to regain control. The car that had stopped reversed rapidly, the driver shouting into his phone. "Police. I need police at Blackwater Bridge." Shots fired. Dorian fought like a man with nothing to lose, clawing at Caspian's face as they struggled for the gun. Evangeline rolled away from the fighting, her shoulders screaming where she'd hit the pavement. The weapon went off again, and for a terrifying moment, she thought one of them had been shot. Then Caspian was standing over Dorian's motionless form, the gun in his hands and blood spreading across the bridge's surface. "Is he dead?" Caspian knelt beside his former friend, checking for a pulse. "No, but he's not getting up anytime soon." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The Good Samaritan was standing beside his car, shouting directions into his phone and keeping a cautious distance from the scene. Evangeline sat on the asphalt, adrenaline making her hands shake. They'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. "It's over," Caspian said, kneeling beside her. "It's finally over. What happens now? Now we tell the truth. All of it. And we let Eleanor rest in peace." 6 months later, the gardens of the Thornfield estate bloomed with life for the first time in 5 years. Evangeline knelt among the raised beds she'd designed, harvesting herbs that would grace the tables of her culinary school. The morning air carried the scent of rosemary and thyme, of possibility and new beginnings. The legal proceedings had taken 3 months to conclude. Dorian's confession, extracted during a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty, had revealed the full scope of his crimes. The embezzlement, the frame job, Eleanor's murder disguised as an accident. Cordelia, manipulated through gambling debts and blackmail, had provided testimony that corroborated every detail. The media attention had been intense but brief. The grieving widower exonerated, the business partner revealed as a killer, the young woman who'd helped expose the truth. But public interest faded quickly, moving on to fresher scandals and newer tragedies. The first class arrives in an hour. Evangeline looked up to find Caspian approaching through the garden paths, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that still made her heart skip. The shadows that had haunted his face were gone, replaced by something she'd never thought she'd see: contentment. Nervous. He handed her a cup, his fingers lingering against hers in the casual intimacy that had developed between them. Terrified. What if they hate my teaching methods? What if the recipes don't work? What if you succeed spectacularly and change 12 young lives for the better? She accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth to steady her hands. The Ravencroft Culinary Institute for At-Risk Youth was her dream made manifest, funded by Caspian's restored fortune and housed in the renovated east wing of the mansion. 12 teenagers from backgrounds similar to her own would live and learn here, discovering that food could be about more than survival. Mrs. Chun would be proud, he said quietly. I hope so. I keep thinking about what she told me once, that cooking is about giving people a reason to come together. These kids, they've never had that. They've been told their problems to be managed, not people worth nurturing. Like someone else I know. She smiled, remembering the broken woman who'd answered his advertisement 6 months ago. That person felt like a stranger now, someone she'd left behind in the ashes of Dorian's schemes. Any word from the adoption agency? They'll have a decision by the end of the week. Caspian's voice carried a mixture of hope and anxiety that matched her own feelings. Though I still think we're crazy for trying to adopt while planning a wedding and opening a school. We're not crazy. We're optimistic. There's a difference. The wedding would be small, intimate, nothing like the elaborate affair Eleanor and Caspian had shared. They decided on the garden behind the house, surrounded by the herbs and flowers that represented their new life together. Simple vows, close friends, and the understanding that they were choosing each other not from desperation or loneliness, but from genuine love. I have something for you. He pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. An early wedding present. Inside was a wooden spoon, carved from cherry wood and polished to a warm glow. But it was the inscription that made her breath catch. For Evangeline, who taught me that love has many flavors. All of them sweet. Caspian, it's beautiful. I made it myself. Took a woodworking class, nearly lost 3 fingers, but I wanted to create something with my own hands. Something that represented what you've given me. She traced the smooth handle, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The broken widower and the orphaned cook, finding healing in each other's damaged places. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't broken into your house that day? You didn't break in. The door was unlocked. Mostly unlocked. He laughed, pulling her close enough to rest his forehead against hers. I think you would have found another way in. You're persistent like that. Is that a polite way of saying stubborn? It's a loving way of saying determined. You saw something worth saving in a man who'd given up on himself. That takes either tremendous courage or incredible foolishness. Probably both. They stood together in the garden, surrounded by the life they'd built from the wreckage of their separate tragedies. In the distance, a van pulled up the driveway, carrying the first group of students who would call this place home. Are you ready for this? He asked. Are you ready to be married to someone who's about to become very busy with 12 teenage culinary students? I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as we face it together. The van doors opened, and young voices filled the air. Evangeline squeezed Caspian's hand once before moving toward her new students, toward the future they'd chosen to create. That evening, after the orientation sessions and tours, after the nervous laughter and cautious optimism of 12 kids who'd learned not to trust good things, Evangeline sat in the kitchen that had become the heart of their home. The same kitchen where she'd first cooked for a broken man, where they discovered truth and survived betrayal, where they'd fallen in love over simple meals and complicated conversations. Caspian found her there, planning menus for the next day's classes. How did it go? Better than I hoped. They're scared, but they're curious. That's enough to start with. Just like someone else I remember. She smiled, remembering her first night in this house, when survival had been her only goal and love had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. I have news, he said, settling beside her at the counter where they'd shared so many meals. The adoption agency called. Her heart stopped. And they approved us. There's a little girl, 8 years old, been in foster care for 3 years. Her name is Sophie, and she loves to help in the kitchen. Tears blurred her vision as she absorbed the news. A family. They were going to be a family. When can we meet her? Next week. If everything goes well, she could be home by Christmas. Home. The word carried weight and warmth, encompassing everything they'd built together. Not just the house, but the life they'd created within its walls. The school, the garden, the future they were writing one day at a time. I love you, she said simply. I love you too. All of you. The fierce woman who defended me from Cordelia. The brave woman who helped me find the truth. The generous woman who's giving broken kids a chance at something better. And I love the man who hired a cook he didn't need, who fought for justice he didn't think he deserved, who learned to believe in second chances. Outside, the New England autumn painted the world in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, Evangeline Ravencroft and Caspian Thornfield planned their wedding, their family, their shared tomorrow. And in the garden, the herbs grew strong and sweet, ready to flavor whatever recipes life would bring.